Welcome to the Identity Store video session on looking after your tools. So this came in from a question that was asked earlier this week, and I wanted to talk particularly with emphasis on stropping. So sharpening your blades is one thing. Those of you who are old enough to remember the guy that would come round with his van with a big grinding wheel, and you'd take out all your blades and they'd be sharpened. So on a grinding wheel or a grinding stone, or even honing, you're looking at re-angling the blade, the keen edge. It quite often will take away quite a bit of the metal. Stropping is the next phase on, where you're really polishing out the burrs that get caused, that catch on a microscopic level. So if you were to look at your knife underneath a microscope, so if you were to look at this edge underneath the microscope, you would see lots of particles that would kind of be almost magnetically attracted still to them. And when you're cutting, it makes your knife appear blunt, it causes drag, and it just interferes with that fine, keen edge as you're cutting. And it's quite an important thing to be cutting your leather with a good sharp knife. Leather's quite a tough material. And if you want to get professional edges, professional looking, accurate cut out pieces, and speed as well, it really will speed up your process if you're getting good clean cuts each time, rather than having to really go rework, recut, refine, because your knife is jagged. So this is one of the Identity Store strops. This has been made especially to be a strop in terms of the tannage process. It's kind of this grey leather with a sort of almost like a suede nubucky feel, and that's the top surface that I normally use. So the important thing with stropping is the angle at which you use it. So it's 90, 45 and then half again. So you're looking at a 22.5 degree angle, and you want to have it on something that's quite firm as well. Some people will actually glue these onto blocks, or have them glued on an area on their work desk. I prefer to just have it where I can move it about a bit. So you want to do a firm pressure at that angle, keeping your finger quite near to the blade tip to avoid too much bend. And several strokes in one direction, and pay attention to the pressure through to the tip of the blade. You want it to be stropped evenly. And then it's about going back the other way. And you will see, probably from the camera already, that how much darker the leather is going. And that's because those particles are now being transferred into the leather and being picked up by the leather and polishing that blade. So if I feel it now, I can feel it's a lot sharper. This was quite blunt, I have to say. So one of the questions people ask is whether you need to use any kind of paste or rouge when you're doing this stropping. These are great. They're designed to be used without any. One of the reasons for maybe using the Jeweler's Rouge paste would be something like this Jeweler's Rouge here, which we have on the website. It gives another added abrasion, so it's going a little bit further back, a bit like as if you were honing. So you would put that onto the leather, just giving it a rub, transferring some of that chalk into the leather, and it just gives another kind of extra abrasive surface, a bit coarser if you like. So if I do that again with this knife, and again give it a strop. When you're starting is when I would use the strop before you start anything. So as you pick up the tool and use it, give it a strop before starting, unless you know that you've just put a new blade in. So let's get a piece of leather and we'll do a cut through. Now, whenever I'm cutting, I try not to go through in all the way. I just try to use the same pressure all the time and then go back through. But actually that's cut it with 2 cuts pretty much, and really nice even cut there. Okay, and another way you can test it is to cut your corners because you're cutting down and pressing through, and it's gone completely through and cut my corners for me. So that in that method you're using the tip of the blade down and pressing through that tip, and it's got a good clean cut. So looking after these blades, doing your stropping. People have asked how often you need to do it when you're working. It's just when you start noticing it dragging, but if you've been using and doing lots of cuts, and it's better to try and stay ahead of the game, if you like. You will notice that it will vary with different leathers. So if you're using a piece of veg tan shoulder, it will go through a lot easier than it might do using something like this double tan, which is a part veg, part chrome, firm leather calf. Some of those leathers can be a bit harder on the blades, and therefore they'll blunt quicker, and the same with using things like a pull up or an oil tanned. Some of those might affect the blade a little, so just keep an eye on it, be aware of it as you're working, and just make it a habit and practice that you go back to stropping. Now that's tool care for knife blades, but you can equally use this strop to strop other tools. So you can use it to strop your stitching chisel. So exactly the same principle. I tend to have different areas on my strop that I use for different things. That's for my knives, and this one is my chisels. So again, if you think that they're very blunt, you can use the jeweler's rouge, but otherwise I just give them a couple of wipes at that same 22.5-degree angle and down, and it's left some quite strong black kind of marks in the leather there, and I can feel my tips that those feel a lot sharper now. If I was to test those, just literally pressing them down, yeah, they're going nicely into the leather. Now some people have asked about stropping these tools, whether it alters the shape of the diamond, which would then affect your stitching, and the answer is it will depend on how much you spent on the tool in the first place and the quality of the metal. So ours are made from quite a hardened steel, and it would take an awful lot of stropping for them to alter the shape. You will see on this one, which I've had for many years, that the tops are polished out to quite a silver, where I have worn away some of that with my stropping, as opposed to this newer one. So if you imagine that you've got your diamond hole, when you're stropping, you're really only getting to two sides of the strop, if you like, to sharpen. So over a really, really long period of time, you're going to elongate that to a narrower oblong, and over an even longer period of time, that may start to become making the stitch holes narrow, and you may start to find that your threads are catching. If that gets to that point, these chisels aren't particularly expensive, even for the higher quality metal. It's just time to say thank you for your service and maybe buy a new one. The other way that you can protect and lengthen the life of them and also get good results is to push them into beeswax. As you know, many of you, I'm always on about this, before you start and every few times that you're using. This just puts a little grease layer on the tops and tips, helps to keep them sharp and helps them to go through the leather. That's true of any punches, your drive punches, anything else that you're putting that thump through, you can use the beeswax with. And also consider your mat underneath. The harder the surface underneath, the more that fine edge of that blade is going to really take a lot of impact. These are designed to be cutting mats rather than punching mats, so just bear that in mind. I find them quite hard on the tools. I do prefer to use the Poundo board, which is on the website, or an acrylic kind of like those red, compacted, sort of almost like a chopping board, but something that's going to allow the blade to go in without damage. So that's really quite important. You can buy quite small squares of these just to make sure you've put underneath, or a compressed piece of leather even would work as well. It just is anything that's going to give that tip some advantage. It will prolong it and keep it staying sharp. So that's those. You can also think about stropping your awl, which you may not have considered. Again, it's the same principle. Now this time I do take the angle a lot lower, because you can see on the, if you look at your awl, your stitching awl, this is, you can see the diamond shape and the flat blade. So I just kind of rotate it round, focusing on that tip, and give it a bit of sharpness. These awls are incredibly sharp all along the way, so just focus on just almost rounding it as you roll it over, just to keep those edges polished out and sharp. And another tip for these, you can also just rub a bit of the beeswax along the blade. Again, same principle, just provides a little bit of grease for helping it go through the leather. And I would say, particularly if you're using really thick leathers, think about putting something between it. So a piece of carpet, I've got a piece of just card that's very thick. If you put your leather on top and then you've got your poundo board underneath, I'm going to stand for this. When you push down through, you can make sure that you get your hole at the back a nice size. So if I push down through these, this gives me my diamond hole, but I've also got my holes at the back fairly open, and that will really help me when I come to do my stitching. If you were to push these down onto this hard block, it's resisting the tip coming through, and you're getting a really small hole on the back there, almost not coming out at all. So you need it to go through and into something, but something that's not going to then blunt the awl. So a piece of card, a piece of leather underneath, or poundo board ideally, and as I say, carpet works really well. The carpet type that's got a little bit of hessian back, keep a little bit of a cutting from it, and keep that handy for pushing your awl through. So the other thing I do with this is I do store them into a cork to keep them sharp, to keep them from stabbing myself, and keep them in my tool roll. The cork helps to keep that blade really clean. It also tends to pick up and clean off as you pull out anything that's stuck onto the blade. So that's just a little tip for storing them. And lastly, something that I picked up not that long ago, but I found really does actually work to my surprise, is your leather shears and scissors. If you want to keep these sharp, cutting through on a bit of folded up silver foil really works. So just do several cuts, and it just helps again to kind of just sharpen and take out some of those burrs that can drag. These are just the little leather shears from the website. They're very inexpensive, but I find them really, really handy to have around. They'll cut actually up to quite thick leathers. So yeah, they're on the site as well. So that's a few little tips on tool care. I would also recommend the Al Stolman book on Leathercraft tools, which again is on the website. It's got a whole extensive thing in a very, those of you who haven't come across Al Stolman before, he was so detailed and his illustrations are absolutely beautiful. And he's just done a whole book about all the different tools, how to look after, how to care for them. And that should answer a lot of questions about any of the tools that I haven't covered here today. So I hope you find that a bit helpful, and get stropping. Thank you very much.